Why didn't you just tell everybody the laptop's real? We're not vouching for what's on it.
I've never seen a time where so many of the threats are all elevated.
With illegally acting as an agent of a foreign government.
Well, we had a spy for 40 years from Cuba who finally got arrested and charged. FBI Director Wray testifies in front of a Senate committee, and also Joe Biden's slush fund of taxpayer dollars of leftover COVID money. All that and more coming up on this episode of Daily Caller Live. Thanks so much for tuning in. My name is Jobob. Daily Caller Live starts right now.
2, 1.
Here we go!
Might be the only brown guy on earth named Jobob.
That is actually their name, Jobob.
Ooh, live-ish from the dingy bunker, completely cut off from the outside world, except for you fine folks. My name is Jobob. This is Daily Caller Live. Thanks so much for tuning in on today. It is Wednesday, December 6th, the year of our Lord, 2023. Hope you're having a good day. I might ruin it. And I feel like that happens often on this show. You might be having a good day, you go about your morning, doing your daily routine, and all of a sudden the bad news hits you in the face. But guess what? Life is tough. Get a helmet. A friend of mine said that once and went nutso over the internet on it. By nutso, I mean lots of attention. But anyways, this might sour your mood just a little bit. So now yesterday we brought you a story out of Los Angeles. The fact that apparently the government plan to get homeless people off the streets isn't working. Now, I know that might have come as a shock to you, but today is no different. Prepare yourself, friends, because this is going to shock your system. When it boils down to this particular story is this. Joe Biden, President of the United States of America, Delaware, has now a slush fund of taxpayer dollars of money that he can effectively kind of just use wherever he wants, whenever he wants, in 2024 as he's running for president. Effectively, he has a lump of money just sitting there unused that will now be used to make people who may or may not vote for him, it'll bring them onto his side just a little bit. Oh, well, this city needs a bridge in this area? Well, good news. We have tons of money here to throw at that bridge. Taxpayer dollars that I can facilitate as the president of the United States. You want to talk about corruption? Now, to break it down exactly what is happening here, the Washington Times did a pretty good report on this. Where is Joe Biden getting his political slush fund money from? Well, you're not going to believe this. COVID relief. The Biden administration, this is from the Washington Times, is giving states and municipalities more flexibility to hoard money from the $100 billion pot of unspent pandemic relief through 2024 after billions have been spent on golf courses, lottery prizes in New Mexico for unvaccinated people, for vaccinated people, and legal systems for asylum seekers in Illinois. Now, just to not gloss over that quickly, a bunch of the COVID money was spent not for COVID. Again, I know that might be shocking to a lot of people out there, but I'll repeat it. A lot of the COVID money wasn't spent on COVID. In some cases, it was spent on golf courses. In especially the schools cases, it wasn't spent on better equipment to filter out the air in the school classrooms. It wasn't spent on catching up for tutors and things that people and students might need to catch up because of the disastrous COVID policy during the school lockdowns was setting kids back years. It wasn't spent on any of that. It was spent on teacher bonuses and pay raises for administration. So who could be shocked that the unused COVID money isn't going to be used in the same way? The Washington Times goes on. The little noticed rule change from the Treasury Department before Thanksgiving relaxes how states and municipalities must legally obligate money from the $350 billion coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery fund by the end of next year. In other words, any of the unused money that was allocated in the $1.9 trillion COVID relief package that Joe Biden passed, any of that unused money of the $350 million earmarked for local and state governments, any of the unused money now has, quote unquote, relaxed standards for being used, as instructed by the U.S. Treasury Department, run by the executive branch, i.e., President Biden. What does that do, you might ask? Well, if certain areas that, I don't know, the president depends on, like Dearborn, Michigan, who he is pandering to with his soft talk on Hamas, because it's a heavily Muslim population in that area, and he needs that area to win Michigan. That's just one example. In other swing states, let's say like Ohio or Pennsylvania, maybe one of the, let's take Pennsylvania for example. Pennsylvania, which is, in a lot of ways a swing state, not so much in the recent years anymore, but in a lot of ways a swing state, all of a sudden a municipality in Pennsylvania needs, I don't know, an off-ramp for one of their most popular freeways. And who's going to build that off-ramp? Well, of course, the union workers that work on the roads in the state of Pennsylvania. And if that project gets approved and those union workers get money, who do you think they're going to vote for? You got it. The person that approved the project. Holy cow. Again, who could have seen this coming? Oh, wait, everybody saw this coming. This is exactly what politicians do. The quote-unquote unused money isn't going to go back to the government at all. And by the government, I mean the people like me and you. That money isn't going to come back to us. Instead, it's going to be squandered throughout 2024 with relaxed guidelines specifically geared and probably targeted for areas that Joe Biden knows that he needs in his favor to win the 2024 presidential election. The Washington Times continues. The fund was created as a part of the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan, quote unquote, signed by President Biden in 2021. The rule changes creates an election year Bidenomics slush fund, according to a report by the Economic Policy Innovation Center, a right-leaning think tank, which goes without saying, this is, of course, who's the type of people that's going to point this out. It says that the rule change allows for state and governments to count funds as obligated beyond 2024 if they are merely reported to the Treasury by April. In other words, they don't have to be spent. They just have to be allocated by April. Again, in other words. I feel like I've said that a million times. If I were a municipality and I was being courted by the Biden administration to coax my populace or union members or employees of that particular city or state office to vote for the president, then I would be pretty much allowed to do whatever I want with that funding as long as I told the Treasury by April. There's no longer timelines set on when the money has to be spent, and the relaxed guidelines of what the money has to be spent on gives me a lot of leeway and a lot of leverage to the Biden administration to allow people, prospective voters of his, to do whatever they want with the money. If you were to put it as plainly as humanly possible, it is a bribe. President Biden is effectively bribing municipalities, not with campaign dollars, with your taxpayer dollars in order to help him garner success in the 2024 election. Now, I want to be fair in saying this. This is not unusual to happen on the Democrat side and on the Republican side. Maybe some of you don't like hearing that, but that's just factually true. For example, I seem to remember, I don't remember the specific number, but during the 2020 election when Donald Trump was president, he allocated a ton of money to HBCUs, historically black colleges, in hopes of courting the black vote, which he did from the executive branch as the president of the United States. Now, if I remember right, it was something like $50 million. That's a lot of money. I'm not trying to say that that's not a lot of money, but it is nowhere near the $100 billion we're talking with Joe Biden's slush fund, again, of taxpayer dollars. And of course, the worst thing about all of this is that we don't get any of that money back. No. That money has been allocated for quote unquote relief. And if you know anything about government agencies, the common thread is if you don't spend the money, you won't get it next year. The wrap up of this is this. Further, states and local governments have obligated only about 56% of the total appropriations of the $350 billion program. So what is that? 56, let's just say an even 60% of the 40% of that $350 billion program is still up for grabs. The new rules promise to give them more time and wiggle room to spend the money rather than return it to the federal government, i.e. me and you, which the Washington Times reminds us ran a deficit of $1.7 trillion in the fiscal year of 2023. So I don't know how you get around this other than just knowing about it. If you don't know about this, there's nothing you can really do about it. But at the end of the day, it is literally campaigning with, that's probably the nice way of saying it, but it literally is bribing municipalities that probably work with unions with projects and money to do those projects in exchange for their votes. Again, to be fair, this happens a lot, but never really to this level. You get discretionary funding. You get discretionary funding at the executive level, but not $350 billion, or let's just say 40% of $350 billion. What is that? 140 billion? 40%? 40% of 350, I think, is 140 billion. So $140 billion of just fund money for Joe Biden to spend indiscriminately in areas that he needs to win in 2024 as the presidential election. Holy cow. To say that it is a slush fund used to bribe people for votes, I don't think is an overstatement. But such is the political climate that we currently occupy. But I want to move on to this because I think this is interesting, fascinating, and scary all at the same time. FBI Director Wray testified in front of the Senate. Oh, shoot. Which committee is this? Might be the Oversight Committee, which would explain why the FBI director is testifying in front of them. But you know what I learned, or at least reminded myself in my head of that you need to do in order to be fully in touch with what's going on the Hill in DC. Given that I have only a limited amount of clips that I can put in here, I think we only put 2 in here. One was kind of the questioning, and we'll play that. I think it was John Kennedy from Louisiana that we got, which hilarious, but also terrifying. And then just a straight up warning. Bottom line, because there's only a limited amount of clips that I can pull, I go through a bunch of different clips from this particular hearing. And what I've gathered is every single clip that I watched, everyone needs to see. Unfortunately, I can't play every single clip on this show. So what I've gotten to is the only way that you can be a responsible, reasonable voter is you have to watch C-SPAN 24 hours a day and consume every piece of information that comes out of these hearings, or else you were probably just freaking lost. Or exactly like this, the show will get clipped up, the clips will get clipped up and played on this show, and either you'd hate it or you love it. I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. I don't know how the American people can continue with the amount of production of quote-unquote news and information at the rate that it's going. It seems unsustainable. Nevertheless, FBI Director Wray testified, and of all of the clips, I thought this is... I have a soft spot for John Kennedy in Louisiana. The guy is just funny. And this wasn't really a funny question, but it was something that I would have liked answered. Watch this, and we'll discuss, especially considering some of the parallels that you can see between this particular instance and a similar instance in 2016. Check it out.
Why didn't the FBI just say, hey, the laptop's real? Why didn't you just tell everybody the laptop's real? We're not vouching for what's on it, but it's real. This isn't a fiction.
Well, as you might imagine, the FBI cannot, especially in a time like that, be talking about an ongoing investigation. Second, I would tell you that at least my understanding is that both the FBI folks involved in the conversations and the Twitter folks involved in the conversations both say that the FBI did not direct Twitter to suppress.
But
a
others
particular
were
story.
in government.
Well, I can't speak to others in government. Now, that's part of the point that I was trying to make, because the Fifth
Yes, sir,
Circuit's
but you're
opinion.
the FBI. You're not part of the White House and part of Homeland Security. You're not supposed to be political. You see all this controversy going on. Why didn't the FBI say, time out, folks, we're not getting in the middle of this, but the laptop's real?
Now, I just like John Kennedy. I'm going to defend the FBI here briefly before we go back on the attack on the FBI. But if I were to defend them, and I'm not even sure that I am defending them, considering what I'm about to say after my quote-unquote defense. If you remember, the FBI has been involved in tense election situations, and their calculus could have been, well, we can tell everybody the laptop is real, especially because this story is burbling up right around when the election is about to happen. We can tell everybody that, but again, in their defense, a little bit, being stuck in a difficult position, at least then, you might recall 2016, in which I think, some people might not like that I'm saying this, I think James Comey reopening the investigation into Hillary Clinton 10 days before the election had an effect. How big of an effect? I have no idea. We'll never know how big of an effect it had. But I do think, if we're all being honest with each other, I think the FBI probably looked at that situation and gone, oh boy, I don't want to get involved in that. That is my brief, concise defense of the FBI and why they might have been caught between a rock and a hard place in that particular instance. Here's where we lambast them. The FBI found out about the laptop, I believe, in early 2019. So in other words, a year and a half before the election was had, probably even more than that, depending on, I think it was February of 2019. My dates are a little bit fuzzy. But if they had the laptop then and authenticated the laptop a year and a half before this became a story, had they said something before they were caught in the position of whether or not they should say something or shouldn't say something, none of this would have mattered. You ask the question, well, why didn't the FBI just authenticate it and say, yes, this is Hunter Biden's laptop? Why did they wait till after the election? Well, because they didn't do it when they probably should have. And again, I don't know the inner workings of the FBI. I don't know what's allowed, what's possible, any of that sort of stuff. But I'm assuming that, considering the severity of the allegations that were brought forth by the laptop, don't you think the FBI should have said something a little bit sooner than a month leading up to the 2020 election? And if they had, that would have absolved them of all of the potential problems they saw coming from them in that month telling everybody, yeah, the laptop's real. Now, John Kennedy said, hey, what about Twitter and Facebook? Why are you having them censor? And Ray, I think, is it accurate saying, well, that wasn't us. That was a lot of other government agencies, but that wasn't the FBI. So, bottom line, FBI score here, D-. Not quite an F. Because I have some grace for the understanding of, yeah, we don't want to have the Comey effect on this election that he had on Hillary's election. That's probably not the best idea to do. But at the same time, had you nipped the problem in the bud earlier, you wouldn't be caught in that precarious situation. But that's enough of that, the laptop thing. There was a bunch of other stuff that got asked that I was kind of like, I care about this sort of stuff, but I think there are bigger problems afoot as of right now. One of those bigger problems was this. Here's FBI Director Wray warning the American people how dangerous of a time we are now living in. Not exactly something you want to hear. And again, does Director Wray have his flaws? Absolutely. But in this particular instance, I think he's probably being pretty sincere about it. Watch this.
So what I would say that is unique about the environment that we're in right now in my career is that while there may have been times over the years where individual threats could have been higher here or there than where they might be right now, I've never seen a time where all the threats, or so many of the threats, are all elevated all at exactly the same time. That's what makes this environment that we're in now so fraught and why funding our men and women who are working shoulder to shoulder with state and local law enforcement and other partners every day makes it even more important, not less.
Yeah, I didn't really like how he got to a funding thing, but I do believe him when he says, look, there may have been bigger, elevated, specific threats, but he said he's never seen a situation within his career that all of the threats are as elevated as they are all at once, which is not a good thing to think about. He went on to say that there are a lot of, well, I don't know if he went on to say this or NBC News took this from what he was saying. He kind of warned the American people of possible threats to places where people congregate. He believes that the war on Hamas is going to allow Islamic extremists to galvanize people, especially in the United States, to do their bidding, which is horrifying to think of. So, especially over the holidays, stay vigilant and stay strapped, but mostly stay vigilant, because this is going to be we are at the very beginning of what a radio duo that I listen to calls the spicy times, and as much as it is engaging to talk about this sort of stuff every day, it is also somewhat worrisome. So do with that information what you will. Speaking of things that are worrisome, this is astonishing. Have you heard about this? Guy by the name of, what's his first name? Rocha. His last name is Rocha. An American diplomat, retired, I believe he's 77 years old now, was arrested yesterday, 2 days ago, on the charges of being a spy, international espionage. He was spying for the Cubans for 40 years. Say that again. 40 freaking years. Which is a lot of years. From 1977 to 2017, at least as I think the timestamp is for this guy, was spying on various goings-on in the United States and relaying those back to Cuba, which is not exactly a friendly to the United States, at least especially during the time in which he was doing his biggest and quote-unquote best work. Here's Merrick Garland announcing this. I think this is fascinating because, again, I've got my issues with Merrick Garland, but on this one, I'm glad the Justice Department is rooting stuff like this out. And I don't know what we do with this guy, but not good that he was able to get away with this for as long as he did. Check it out.
The department has charged former U.S. Ambassador to Bolivia, Victor Manuel Rocha, with illegally acting as an agent of a foreign government. This action exposes one of the highest-reaching and longest-lasting infiltrations of the U.S. government by a foreign agent.
So a couple of the things that were brought up in talking about this dude is that he specifically sought offices that would give him access to information regarding not only Cuba, but one of Cuba's biggest allies and friends on the world stage in Russia, which is not good. So basically, this guy got information that the public could not see about not only Cuba, but Russia and probably American adversaries all over the world, and was giving that information back to Cuba, who was then probably realistically relaying that information or whatever information was important enough to relay to Putin and Russia. Well, Putin obviously hasn't been in power for 40 years, but Russia as a whole. So where does this leave us as a country? How many of these types of people are in our midst? I would hope that it's not many, but at the same time, the question that I have is, how did this guy get caught? And are the means used by which to catch this particular individual being used to the fullest extent to catch anybody else? And I get that that's kind of a scary statement, because what I think is really being said here is, are we keeping good enough tabs on our friends? That gives me a little bit of pause. I don't like that saying, but at the same time, I don't know what's worse, making sure that you have all the proper intel on people that you trust, or having people that you trust who you shouldn't trust. This is I think, a fascinating story, and I don't think we're going to hear the end of this. He's being charged with, what did Garland say? Counts of espionage, or no, illegally operating as a foreign agent, which the wording there makes me think, wait a minute, there's a way to legally operate as a foreign agent? I don't know if they need to tweak the verbiage on what they call, quote unquote, foreign agents, as people who just work for different countries versus people who have malintent. I think maybe they should separate those words just a little bit. But it's going to be fascinating. And the way that they caught this guy was crazy too. What it seems like in reading about this story is that they sent kind of an FBI informant. Was it FBI? Might have been CIA. One of the three-letter law enforcement branches to go befriend this guy. And over the course of a couple months, I guess he just spilled his guts, saying that America must suffer or things of that nature, saying that he has never lost his allegiance to Cuba after 40 years. That's the crazy thing to me. You think after 40 years, especially having spent time in Cuba, he's 77 years old now, so spending the majority of his 30s probably, I don't know if he was in the country beforehand, but spending a good amount of his adult life probably in Cuba, and looking around at what they had there, which was not a lot, and then spending 40 years here and not at any point going, yeah, this actually looks pretty good here. This whole govern yourselves and anybody can succeed no matter what their origin. This actually looks pretty great. At no point did that cross his mind. That's what I think blows my mind the most about the situation, is in 40 years, he didn't even question whether or not what he was doing was the right thing to do or the right side to pick. I don't know what you do with this guy. He's old, and I think a lot of people, especially a lot of lefty people, look at that and go, well, he's old, so, people that are old, that are tried for crimes, especially kind of white-collar crimes like this, I think get the sympathy of the public. When in reality, who knows how many secrets that this guy shared with Cubans and therefore the Russians that got Americans killed or got anybody killed. What I think I'm ultimately saying is I do not care how old he is, how much time he has left with his family. He is a traitor to the United States of America if proven guilty. And if proven guilty as a traitor to the United States of America, he should never see the light of day ever again. Is it sad that an elderly man, it would appear, is taken away from his family and inside of a prison cell for the rest of his days? Yeah, of course that's sad. But also, you know what else is more sad? Being that big of a liability / traitor to this country. You have to set an example. And if you let people get away on the basis that, well, they're just old nowadays. Well, they're just old. All that says to would-be spies from other foreign adversaries is, if I can get away with it for 40 years, then it'll be good. And I don't want that message being thrown out there to our adversaries. Heavy stuff today. But that'll do it for us today. Appreciate you sticking around, tuning in. If you haven't already, give me a follow on any of your social media platforms. Just type in JOBOB, be able to find me pretty much anywhere. If you're not already going to America Fest in Phoenix next week, you need to be. They have fantastic closeout pricing. You can go to amfest.com or tpusa.com/amfest. And I'm telling you, if you haven't been, or even if you have been, you got to check it out. Again, the closeout deals they've got going on. If you feel inclined, shoot me a message on either Facebook or Instagram. I'll link you up with the connections of where to go to buy those tickets. America Fest is the Turning Point USA. It's basically the Coachella for conservatives. like kind of, or the Lollapalooza, depending on what part of the country that you live in. I don't know which reference is more relevant to you, but it's, in my opinion, I think the most energized that the conservative base will get throughout the year. Maybe minus the election night victory party at Mar-a-Lago, but. That'll do it for us today. Appreciate you sticking around, tuning in. We'll see you, what's today? Tomorrow, same time, same place. God bless America.